So let's talk about the get function within the request module for being able to interact with websites. So basically, the request module is a module that's been designed for interacting with websites and being able to do things such as get information from a REST API or send information to a REST API. And basically, this is useful for computers to be able to communicate with each other. You're able to gain access from different services on the internet, or for you to be able to do things such as web scraping a website. So you can use the get function. You can go to a website such as CNN.com or ArsTechnica.com. With the function, you're able to pull in all the text, so all the ASCII that created that web page, you're able to pull that into a variable value, and then once it's in a variable value, you can do whatever it is that you want. You can parse it to try to pull out things like email addresses or web pages or that type of thing, or if it's a REST API and it comes back as a JSON value, you can use that to get the particular type of data that you're trying to access. So what the get function allows you to do is it allows you to go out to a web page, pull in all the text from that web page, and then save it as a value into a variable. Now, the request module is a completely normal, kind of stock standard module that absolutely everybody uses, but for some reason it's not within the Python core modules that are delivered to you when you install Python, so you are going to have to install it. Python 3 --m pip install request, and this will install the request module for you so that you can use the get function for the rest of what we're going to be doing. So for the Python code example that we're going to be using today, we are going to be using the REST API from ip-api.com. This is a great API I've used for a long time. It's free, there's no major restrictions, and basically what this does is it gets your external IP address and then it responds with a whole bunch of information about your IP address. So your external IP address, whatever it is that connects to the ISP, a lot of information about that IP address is actually stored in databases, and it will tell you things such as the state that IP address is in, the city the IP address is in, most likely what the zip code of the IP address is in, the ISP that owns that particular IP address. So it can give you a lot of interesting information without actually having to ask anything from the user. This is just all stored in a database. When we make the request, we're going to get a JSON value back, and if we look at the JSON value, this is what it's going to look like. So again, this is where I say, like, this is what a human reads, right? You got pictures over here, you got different font sizes and all that kind of stuff. That's what people care about. But computers just want basic information. And so this is what the REST API response looks like. This is something called a JSON response, and it'll tell you things like country is United States, region is North Carolina, city is Asheville, zip code is 28805, an approximate latitude, approximate longitude, and a whole bunch of different information. So what's going to be able to happen is our Python script is going to be able to get this information, and then we're going to be able to go through this and pull out the specific data that we care about. So here's a basic script using the request module and the get function. So we're going to go out to that REST API at ip-api.com/JSON. So this is the endpoint that we have to interact with for their API to be able to get data back. So we're going to create this variable called response, and then the value of it is going to equal requests.get, and then pointing to that endpoint, whatever it is. Now, the important thing to understand is when we get the response back, it's going to come back as an object. So what we're going to do here is we're going to print out response as it comes back, and what you're going to see is basically you're just going to get the arrow bracket type things, and basically like a response code to say whether or not it worked. That's all you're going to get. You're not going to get JSON, you're not going to get text, you're not going to get anything else. You're just kind of going to get this object deal. If we don't come down here, we can pull out the status code. So the response that came back, we can print out response.status code, and this will tell us the status of the communication. So this might be important to make sure that the API call actually worked. A status code of 200 means that the API call worked. A status code of 400 generally means there's something wrong with your system. A status code of 500 generally means there's something wrong with the server system. system, so there are different status codes out there. So based off of the status code, you could have like an if-else statement, but this will simply print out the status code for us. If we wanted to print out the response as just text, we can do response.text. So basically the response comes back, we want the response as just text. So this just comes back as a string, and you do with it as you see fit. So this is good for something like web scraping. Let's say I'm going out to a web page, I want to grab all of the text, bring it back, and then parse it. I'm going to want it as a text value. The issue though is if we're going out to a REST API, I don't want to simply be able to parse it using regex or something like that. I want to be able to pull out specific values, and that's where JSON comes in. So down here we have print response.json. So this is pulling the value of response out in JSON so you can actually access specific indexes within that JSON to grab the specific information that you care about. The city, the state, the zip code, the lat, long, that type of deal. Now if I go to run the script, so I'm simply going to hit the little arrow thing to run the script, and we're going to see these different responses, right? So if all we do is print out response, right? So up here, and we simply printed out response, then this is literally all you're going to get. So that's probably not going to be that useful for you. Again, we go and we print the status code. We can see that the status code was 200. So that might actually be useful for you. When we print out the response as text, we're going to see we get this response, right? So it's within the squiggly brackets, but we get this response. And the important thing to understand is although this doesn't look different than this one down here, this is a different data type. This is simply a string. This down here, again, although it looks the same as far as Python is concerned, again, that was brought back as JSON, and so you can actually grab specific values, right? If I want the country, if I want the city, if I want the zip code, I can grab those specific values out of there by simply using the square brackets and calling that particular index. So to make sure you understand what I'm talking about with that whole index thing, so we have our script, and what I've done here is I've simply commented out all of these additional lines, and then down here what you'll see is I did response equals response.json. So we're going to grab the values from response as JSON values and then reassign that to response. So now this is a JSON data type. We can simply then do print response bracket, quotation mark, city, whatever index we care about, and close that out, and that will tell me like what city I'm in. So if I do this now, we can see all it does is it prints out Asheville, right? That's basically how the REST API works. If we go here and we change this to, let's say zip, so I want the theoretical zip code, I can run this and it will pull out just the zip code. So that's the important thing to understand. The difference between .text and .json is .text brings the value back as just a string. It's just a string, there's no indexes, you just got text. JSON brings it back so that you have these indexes that you're able to access very easily. So now let's give you an example of kind of sort of how web scraping works. Whether or not this is strictly legal, I'm not really sure. This is for educational purposes only. So basically we're going to go out to a web page called arstechnica.com. So this is a web page everybody goes to, gets millions of views a day or whatever else, and for whatever reason we want to copy all of the text from just this one web page. Now again, it's not the website. The website is all of Ars Technica. That's not what we're getting. We're just getting whatever is on the home page of arstechnica.com. We're going to be able to pull in all of that text. We're then going to be able to save it as a variable value, and then we can do whatever it is that we want. We could parse it, trying to look for email addresses or URLs or that type of thing. Or what we're going to be doing today is we're actually going to be saving it as a file on our computer so that we can go to that file instead of that server, which is going to be interesting. I'm going to show you that in a second. So anyways, we're going to import the request module. As you do, response is going to equal request.get, and whatever URL we're going to. We're going to print out response.text. So the text from response, we're going to print that out on the screen, and that's just going to be a mess. Because one of the things you do have to think about is when you go to a web page, right, it has CSS, it has JavaScript, it has a whole bunch of stuff on there. And so if you just try to print that out onto your command line screen, it's going to be interesting to take a look at. So what we can do is what I'm going to do is take all that text, and I'm going to save it to a file called scrape.html. So with open, we're going to open a file called scrape.html. We're going to overwrite it as file, and then we're going to do file.write response.text. So all the text that comes in from this response is going to be written to that file. If we go over here, take a look at the File Explorer, we can see that scrape.html isn't there yet. And then we're going to run this script. So this is all the text that we just pulled from arstechnica.com. And literally it's going to be so much text that it's not all going to be able to fit here. But yeah, this is everything, again, from JavaScript to CSS to everything else. So the interesting thing is we go over here and we can see now, we have a file called scrape.html. So these are all the files, or all the text that was brought in, and we can see that this is, again, basically the entire web page. We have the doc type up here, we have the language, we have view, we have the SEO framework that they use, all kinds of interesting information. Now what gets really interesting is we go over to my desktop. So my desktop is my current working directory, and up here I have a file called scrape.html, and if I double click on this, we can now see Ars Technica. We can now see Ars Technica, but that's kind of weird, right? Because if you look up here, it says users, Eli, desktop, scrape.html. So I'm not on Ars Technica. The text component of this is actually coming from my computer. And so as you can see, we basically get the front page of Ars Technica here on my computer. And again, you can parse that or do whatever you want. Do remember, if you are new to the technology world, how this works. The text, again, when I say the text, what I'm talking about is this. The text is on my computer. All these images, the CSS, a lot of this other stuff is actually getting pulled in from their servers. So that's just kind of one of those things just to keep in mind. But if you're trying to pull out things, let's say all you want is things like headlines. I want to be able to pull out all of the headlines from Ars Technica. You could use something like Git with regex or something else to be able to pull out just all the headlines that are currently on Ars Technica. So this is the idea of how Git works. So now you see how to use the request module and the get function. You're able to pull the values from a URL as text or as JSON, and depending on whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, you would use one or other of the data types. As you see, it is incredibly simple and ridiculously easy to use and allows you to do a lot of fun projects.